I have 9 things that if you cannot handle, you should not be considering the Midlands of South Carolina, Lexington, Columbia, and Lake Murray. Plenty of people that have told me they left because they couldn't handle these 9 things. Now again, South Carolina is one of the fastest growing states, and Columbia and its suburbs are constantly topping the charts as one of these areas people are seeking out. But again, it also has people leaving. And these are the 9 reasons that people are telling me. And some of them, to be 100% honest, are progressively going to get worse. So if you can't handle the first few of these that we talk about, the last few, I'm gonna tell you, they're gonna have you running out of this state. Finally, at some point at the end of this, we're gonna talk about, can South Carolina's infrastructure even handle this many people coming here? A question that gets brought up so much. And I added a bonus at the end that is really gonna relate to some of you, others it's not at all. And it's really the only thing that made me question whether or not we made the right decision. And this isn't exclusive to Columbia, this bonus thing. It is anybody that is considering relocating from where they are now. Now, let's talk about number 1, the weather. And now look, in other videos I broke down temperature, seasons, and all that, but we're gonna go in a different direction in this. You can watch those other videos if you wanna know about our averages and things like that. But what we're really talking about is catastrophic weather and flooding. I'm talking about hurricanes, tornadoes, torrential rain, and so much more. And again, a lot of this is gonna be perspective of where you're coming from. I mean, I get people from Florida that would laugh at what we call hurricanes. I get people coming from the Washington, Seattle region that probably see way more rain than we do. But for a lot of people, that change in weather truly takes you by surprise. I know me personally, coming from Southern California, we were constantly in the drought, didn't rain that often, and our biggest threat was earthquakes, fires in the state itself. I always thought the news weatherman was somewhat of a joke. I mean, they're bragging about their Doppler 9000, and why do we need all this advanced technology to tell me it's gonna be sunny? Send this stuff to the East Coast where they need it. Either way, I digress. But one of the first things we realized here is it rains a lot, and you get some pretty wild storms that have like some crazy intense wind that'll take out your trees and branches flying over, and I had a shed almost fly over. As well, every year we get tornado warning. And now, every time they announce a hurricane, you gotta go check the track to see where it's gonna go and if it's coming towards you. Even more so, the first year we moved here was the year of the 2015 flood. If you haven't looked it up, it was this 1,000-year storm that landed right here in the Midlands of South Carolina. It was on the national news because I had people messaging me from friends back home, like, are you guys okay? Because there were houses underwater, people being evacuated from helicopters, boats, and so much more. Now again, this was a 1,000-year storm. This isn't something that happens all the time, but it just really put things into perspective real quick, the fact that this was not Southern California when it came to the weather. And I know I've had clients from other regions of the country that moved here that freaked out, whether it was the tornado warnings, some of the storms and the wind and the rain that we got, or again, when that hurricane warning would go out and it was like, oh my gosh, we're the track, what do we do? Now, knock on wood, in the day, since we've been here, we've fared pretty well. We haven't had any major tornadoes touch down near us. They have happened in the state, don't get me wrong. We've personally never dealt with flooding at our house. We were here during the 2015 flood. As I said, there was a lot of flooding that we saw around us, close proximity, but not directly where we were. And a lot of the hurricanes, typically by the time they got to us, they were downgraded. So again, it hasn't been as bad, but I know for some people that can't handle it, constant being on edge of weather. As well, if you talk to locals, they'll talk about hurricanes like Hugo and tornadoes that happened in the past. So that's why, you know, for some people, they just can't handle that when they're coming from these milder climates that don't deal with these extreme. As well as mentioned, I'm not gonna lie, there are parts of the Midlands that are prone to flooding and are required to have a flood insurance. Again, this is way more prominent near the coast, but it still does exist here in the Midland. And that's where we come in, help guide you. If you're trying to avoid those floodplains, you definitely can avoid them. We're not in a floodplain ourselves. There's very few of them in the area, but you'll definitely want to know where those areas are because again, in 2015, homes did flood. And again, for those not familiar with who I am, my name is Brandon. My team and I of local real estate agents have been helping people relocate right here to the Midlands of South Carolina. So please don't hesitate to reach out. That way you don't have to go out this alone, figure out the hard way. And speaking of weather, number 2 that people can't stand, it's the humidity. It's a humid environment. We're a subtropical environment. I'm not gonna lie, it gets hot and humid in the summer. I was used to that dry heat that we had on the West Coast. And personally, I actually like the humid better. But you do have to kind of get used to it. And I tell a lot of people this actually really depends on your job. So prior to being in real estate, I worked EMS. And I can tell you when we were working car accidents with our brush jackets on the side of the road in the middle of summer, you'd hop back in the ambulance pouring sweat and you just felt like the air conditioner couldn't get cold enough. I'd watch the workers lay asphalt in the summer and I just can't imagine what it'd be like working that job. And I talked about before, on the weekends, if you wait too long to get your yard work done, it feels like it's tough to survive out there. It just really does. Again, I personally prefer the humidity over the dry heat, and maybe it's because now I live half of my career just driving around an air-conditioned car, but I know some people have a hard time handling the humidity, especially if they have that job that they gotta wear a suit and tie outside, they're digging ditches, or they're constantly exposed to the heat. And then number 3 and 4 kind of correlate to the weather. While they're not weather specific, then first we'll get kicked off as South Carolina ranks as one of the worst states for allergies. I mean, I've always had allergies, but you don't realize how bad it is until you live in an environment like this. I mean, I have found myself in some bushes at work back on the West Coast, and my allergy would start acting up. And I'd spend that day kind of sneezing and feeling like crap. However, we have allergy season. Every year it hits and you can't avoid it. Even my wife, this wasn't something she dealt with on the West Coast, like allergies, but every year it hits her too. I mean, all the humidity, greenery, and pollen season.
Yeah, your allergies will get you. I just got a car wash yesterday. This is all pollen. Welcome.
That's right, I was not used to pollen like this. The first time we saw it coming from the West Coast, it looked like there was a fire on the horizon and there was the ash you have on your car. But you quickly learn it's pollen. I've literally had years I could remember where I was driving down the interstate and the wind was blowing that day and I just saw this yellow cloud crossing the interstate. So I tell people, have your Flonase ready if you have your allergies because you just can't avoid it. And no, this is not a sponsored video, but I'll tell you one thing I've learned to love is the Navage. My wife can't stand it, she's tried it. I know it's not for everybody, but let me tell you, it saved me so many times being able to clear out those allergens from your nose to prevent things from getting chaotic fast, because I promise you they will. Whether or not you realize you had allergies, you're gonna find out real quick here. And number 4, as we wrap things up, correlated to the subtropical climate and roll into those things that aren't gonna change and only get worse, bugs, snakes, and critters. I mean, of course, every area has its array of bugs, snakes, bears, coyotes, you name it. But I'm telling you, there are some bugs here I've never seen in my life. And they'll probably freak you out, and don't worry, they will. Me too, if we're at a show and you see some of them, I'll be running right there with you. One of them that people always joke about is the flying cockroaches. That's right, the first time you see a cockroach fly, you're gonna wonder where you moved. Now, I learned real quick, these are not what I like to call your dirty cockroaches. You know, the ones that you see in a restaurant and they tell you to run, right? Palmetto bugs are attracted to water. And again, human environment. So if you see them in your house, it doesn't mean you forgot to take the trash out. They just like these damp, wet environments. Now, when we first moved here, we lived in an apartment and we got them a lot more, but knock on wood, they haven't been as bad now that we're in the house we're in, and our last house was the same way. And then as well, adding on, fire ants. You'll go in your backyard and you'll find this sand mound that is just massive. And if you dare step in it, you will instantly regret it. While these little ants are tiny, they sure do leave a mark, and my gosh, does it surprise you how much it hurts. And all of a sudden it's just your leg, you'll start feeling it. And then in certain areas, the gnats. I've typically found them close to the farmland. I remember my first year on the ambulance, I was trained out by some of the farmlands and it was just like ridiculous. Like there was nothing you can do, but I've been in some random neighborhoods where again, it's like it felt like you couldn't open your mouth without gnats flying in. Now again, a lot of this is seasonal. As well, you know, there are some massive spiders I've seen. And the thing they always tell you is the little things are the ones you need to be worried about, not always the big scary ones. But again, at least one of the benefits of this is of course, there are pest treatment companies that come treat your house for a lot of this. I know we pay for this and it's a lifesaver. We rarely get creepy crawlers inside of our house. Now outside, there's only so much you can do. And a funny story on that, when we first moved here, there was a weird bug I'd never seen on the ceiling. And of course, not knowing, I took the fly swatter and I hit it and the thing exploded like a highlighter. Well, it was one of those glow bugs, the fireflies that they call them. So we have a lot of those here too, which are actually really cool. Our local minor league baseball team is named after fireflies because you can go out sometimes and in the tree trees, you'll see it kind of light up, really cool. But either way, I thought that was a funny story. But either way, outside, again, let's talk about that freaks a lot of people out, snakes. Yeah, from what we've been told, copperheads, moccasins, we've been told they exist here. And if you got dogs like us, you freak out every time they run outside. Like, please don't try and go get in a fight with a snake. And now we live on our neighborhood pond. And some of the neighborhoods out there that are fishing have definitely seen poisonous ones in the wetlands out there. Now, thankfully in our yard, we've only come across non-poisonous ones. But the first one we saw came out and it was literally eating a frog. I didn't know at the time if it was a good snake or bad snake, nor did I take the time to let me Google what kind of snake this is. And some may get mad in the comments, but let's just say I saved the frog's life. The frog is doing well today. Can't talk about the snake. But I know so many people that just can't stand all these creepy crawlers all around them, especially if used to areas that don't have all of that. But either way, let's get down to the big stuff. We can move away from the weather, the bugs, and all that. So number 5, this is a slower pace of life. I had people in the comments recently say that they moved here from Dallas, Miami, and other places, and they couldn't stand it. The city was not up to their standard. Well, according to Stats Online, Dallas metro area claims to have around 7 million people, where Columbia metro area claims to have less than 1 million. So no, they're not the same, and you'd be crazy to expect them to be the same. Again, people have gotten irritated of how long it takes to get things done, whether it's getting your car repaired, getting work done on your house, or just conveniences around your house, to be 100% honest. They just couldn't stand it. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but I hate to say it, this area wasn't built with the idea that it was ever gonna get this big. So sometimes you do have to drive ways to get to Costco, Whole Foods, or other places that used to having on every corner around every subdivision. And we'll dive into this more later, but I tell you this because it's not that big city. Yes, it's growing, but it's not gonna be this fast-paced life that used to. A lot of conveniences you may be used to may not be here either. I've had people say, well, where's this, where's that? Sorry, it's just not that big of an area. And I joke all the time, but there's a lot of truth to the fact that if you're getting work done on your house, you may call 3 people, 1 doesn't show up, 1 shows up on the wrong day, and the one that does show up seems to be great, but he's booked out for the next 6 months. It's just the reality of being in these smaller suburbs and smaller cities. Again, I talk about how a lot of this is perspective where you're coming from. Because, I mean, again, as I said, I came from Southern California where this wasn't as much of an issue. Now, again, of course, I have some people coming from smaller towns that are surprised how big the area is and how busy it is. And again, we'll dive into that in a little bit. But again, that's where a lot of perspective comes in. But these are things that people told me they just could not handle. And I've helped people honestly sell to move out because of these things. And number 6, property taxes. And this may take you by surprise because you've heard that South Carolina has some of the best property taxes in the country. And this is true. But there's a few things that take people by surprise. The first one we're going to talk about is secondary residence property taxes. Yes, our property taxes are great if it is your primary residence. But if it's not, expect that number to be about 5 times as much. I've learned a lot of you like to look at property taxes on some of the home search site, and it blows your mind with some people paying taxes. And often you'll message me asking about that. Well, that's probably because it's their secondary residence. It's a rental, second home, vacation home, whatever you want to call it. And I've had someone recently in the comments say that their property taxes on their second residence here in South Carolina was so much more expensive than their much larger primary house in Georgia. Flexing much, are we? Trying to claim that our property taxes sucked. Well, again, it's because it's a secondary residence in South Carolina. South Carolina encourages homeownership, and so that's why they do this. And let me give you an example, because you're like, okay, sure, Brandon, I hear you. So a tax estimator on 250,000, all the county sites have their estimators, and I'm just gonna give you Lexington, Richland County, just to give you an idea. So Lexington County, 250,000 property, it's estimating it to be about $1,429 a year. Richland, it's estimated about $2,033 a year. Now, this is not your primary residence. In Lexington, that number goes up to $7,372, and Richland goes up to $8,252. And remember, this is a $250,000 house estimate. Let's not get started on your vacation home on Lake Murray that you plan to rent out until you can retire. That would literally make your jaw drop. And I say this because I've literally watched people's jaws drop when I pull up this estimator online in person, and it's like, what? That's right. Primary residence great, secondary not. And this is always a reminder for all my investors that call, make sure you're calculating this into your formula when considering South Carolina, because this is not Columbia specific thing. The variance in tax rate between primary and secondary is across the state. And continuing on with taxes, this is one of the most controversial things you will see argued about on Facebook groups, in my comments section, everywhere across the internet, people will talk about this. Vehicle property taxes. Yes, I will say for probably the 20th time on a video, and I'll say it 20 more times because it never sticks, we pay property taxes on our vehicles every single year. This will include your cars, your boats, your RVs, you name it. No, this is not sales tax, this is property tax, just like you have on a house. You can argue with me all day long about how you already paid your sales tax and you didn't have this in your state, but we have it in South Carolina. It's been here ever since I moved here, and I bet it's been here for many years before that. Again, depending on what county you plan on living in, they do have these tax assessor's page, and you can put in your car value and it'll give you an estimate of what it's going to be a year. And again, there is fluctuation from one county or another just on that rate that it's going to be. We have mill rates here, it's different. And so you'll have to check in the county you're considering. And as I've said before in other videos, they have their own depreciation calculator to determine the value of your vehicle. So I can't tell you what the value is going to be, but I can tell you on my last vehicle, it was less than Kelley Blue Book value. So you can use that and just assume it's going to be less, but it's not cheap. It's something you have to keep in the back of your budget. And no, I know a lot of people just can't stand this, especially considering now they've added on an additional fee when you first register that vehicle in the state. A lot of people like to call it the New York tax, but every new vehicle has to pay this fee. Every new registered vehicle in the state has to pay this fee. Now, the one benefit I always tell people is when they kind of enacted that a few years back, they cap sales tax when you purchase a brand new vehicle. So when you buy the car, you won't pay more than $500 in sales taxes. So at least you're saving there. But again, the difficult thing about this is I just bought a new vehicle and we don't tend to buy really expensive cars, but I was blown away by what new cars cost these days just for not the expensive vehicles. Like everything's expensive these days, but as these values go up, so do your taxes. And again, same with house values. House values have risen over the past years, and so have property taxes. Now, of course, when it comes to property taxes, this is where it's different. Your cars, they reassess every year, and so it depreciates, which is good, depreciating asset. Hey, houses are different, right? Historically, they've gone up. And so unless a property is sold, properties are reassessed every 5 years. And what I can find on the county assessor site, there's a 15% cap on the increase they can make. Now, typically this works in your favor because historically prices have increased 5% year over year. Obviously, like a lot more in 21 and 22. So over 5 years, you'd expect about a 25% increase on your value, but your tax only being a 15% increase. And you'll find some houses where people have been living in them for many years, and they're currently being assessed at 50% or below the current value. So I always tell people, because people ask, tax assessments are not a great way to determine value, especially here in South Carolina, just because, again, the way they do it's different. Now, again, as I said, it's reassessed when a sale happens. Now, because we pay taxes in arrears, conversation for another day, that first tax bill when you move into your new house that you bought will look pretty good. But I promise you, the next year it will be reassessed at the value you purchased that house, and that tax bill will most likely go up. Attorney covers this a lot at the closing table. Again, that's why I say this is not something that's going to get better when it comes to property taxes, secondary residence, and car taxes, because again, with prices going up, taxes go up. Number 7, this is the South. Now, geographically, I knew you'd understand that, but I'm not sure entirely everybody understand what that means. I mean, a lot of people are taken back by the fact here in the South, people love their guns, they love shooting off fireworks for holidays, football games, and so much more. It's the Bible Belt, and there's a lot of rural areas. Again, those coming from these bigger areas are not used to some of these things. Now, granted, some of you moved here because of these things, but I know in California, this was what people like to call a culture shock coming from there, which we were hoping for a culture shock, and we got it. Where I live now, I mean, there's a farm right around the corner, and as new people keep moving in the neighborhood, the comments in the Facebook groups always come out when they hear them shooting guns off. What's going on? What are all these gunshots? Every once in a while, they even shoot off their cannon, and boy, does that get the comment section going. Makes me laugh every time. And fireworks. People get mad that New Year's, 4th of July, they don't last for a day, they last for about a week plus. That's right. People get mad about their dogs freaking out, and all you get is somebody fighting back in the comment section saying, we live in America and we celebrate freedom. America, right? And welcome to the Bible Belt. There are churches on every corner, multiple denominations. Take your pick. They take over strip malls and so much more. I've had people that were not religious that were taken back that their kids got a funny look when the kids at school asked what church they attended, and they said they didn't attend church. This is their way of life. We migrated here from different areas. And just like you look at them funny if they showed up in New York City with their cowboy boots on and their cowboy hat, they're gonna look at you funny when you question their ways. And as I said, it gets real fast. One minute you're driving past Chick-fil-A, all these Publix, the next minute you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. The edges of dense population and rural happen fast. 100% honest, those people on that rural side love it there. They don't want you encroaching on their side. And then complain online when the builder development shows up around the corner because they know you're gonna complain about the ways that they live just because you moved across the street from them. You get mad about the guns, the fireworks, and all that. Hey, again, some of y'all moved here for this, but I'm just telling you the facts of what people just can't handle about some of these areas. Now let's talk about the ones that are progressively gonna get worse. Again, I know I talked about taxes can get progressively worse, but these ones are a little bit bigger on that. Probably the biggest one you hear people talk about online, people can't handle, can't stand, is the infrastructure. Can South Carolina handle it? Traffic is getting worse. I mean, South Carolina was already ranked as having some of the worst and poorly ranked drivers and roads before we showed up. Part of the reason is you learn real quick, this is a very car dependent area and there's not a ton of public transportation. So can the state continue to handle this growth? Talked about before, this area is not walkable. Of course, you can walk around in your neighborhood, your subdivision. If you need to get anywhere in the area though, you're gonna have to drive. I told people before, it's rare that you're gonna find a neighborhood that you can walk to downtown. Don't get me wrong, there's some houses scattered around Lexington, Columbia, but I've shown them more times than once, and typically it's not what people were looking for. Just being real. Most people are either looking for those subdivision with amenities, the neighborhood gatherings, the pools, or they want to be on an acre away from their neighbors. And unfortunately, none of those at this point sits right there on the edge of town. They're usually pushed out of town that you have to drive to the local parades, concerts, fairs, and more. Because of this, it makes driving a nightmare everywhere. And again, South Carolina has been ranked as some of the worst drivers around. Of course, the states, counties, and towns are trying to do their part, but it's a little late in the game, and they can't keep up. And this is only getting worse and worse. A lot of people just don't see the light at the end of this tunnel. There's some parts of town that I'm wondering, how are they gonna fix this? Just being honest. I mean, putting in a couple roundabouts ain't doing it. I mean, they're widening the interstates to make your commute a bit easier, but what about getting out of your neighborhood to the interstate or to the grocery store? Some of the neighborhoods are even nightmares to get out of because you have to cross traffic and it just never stops. And again, this is one of those things where we come into play because oftentimes people are looking at a map or looking at pictures online of neighborhoods and think it's gonna be pretty close to everything. But they quickly realize it's all very spread out. It's not as easy as you would think to get all the places you need. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it was never planned for this. Everything feels like an afterthought. It was not developed with the thought of, okay, where the school is gonna go, where the shopping gonna be, in some of these master planned areas that you see across the country. It just seems whenever a piece of land comes up that's big enough, it's where it gets thrown. It almost seems chaotic and has no rhyme or reason how they build it. Sure, there's zoning laws, but trust me when I tell you, I've had people live in neighborhoods but are blown away by how far they'll have to drive to get to Walmart. I mean, this frustrates a lot of people that have kids in elementary, middle, and high school, if you got all three, because you may find yourself all around town just to pick up your kids, then to the other side of town to get groceries. Again, I don't see how this gets better. This is the opposite of a master plan community development. Trust me, I grew up in the area that was one of those master plan towns. It felt like everything was pre-planned of how it was going to be and where the stores and where the schools, and this all just seems like an afterthought. And in the end of the day, I get it. Locals are still blown away by the fact that someone decided to pack their bags from California, somehow randomly chose Lexington, South Carolina. And my guess is the people behind the infrastructure thought the same thing. But here we all are, and here you all come. So now they're chasing their tails trying to fix this. And don't forget, this is a predominantly Republican state, which means they will fight for their lower taxes. Last year in Lexington, they put up a bill to help with infrastructure. Biggest complaint, right? The taxpayers voted down and said, we already pay enough taxes, figure it out with the money you already got. And as I said, public transportation is not common. Sure, there's a bus system over in Columbia, but outside of that, good luck. And yes, the school systems do have bus systems, but a lot of people do opt into the drop-off. We've seen others try and start adding more public transportation in other areas around the state, but again, at this point, you're very car dependent. Shoot, the other thing is there's hardly even bike trails that'll get you to where you need to go. I've always said that. To me, part of the cure is that. Make things more walkable, bikeable, or public transportation. But of course, in the end of the day, that costs money. And this is something that a lot of people don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And I definitely had people say they can't stand it anymore and they need to get out of here. I've met a lot of locals that started life in Irmo, moved out to Chapin, are moving all the way out to Prosperity now to get away from everybody. They keep moving further and further out because they're tired of the growth, which leads to number 9. It's not the same. You'll hear many locals say this. Some see it as a positive, as they say if the city isn't growing, it's dying, but most don't see it that way. From the cost of living to the traffic, more and more people are fleeing and moving out to the more rural areas or out of the state in general. They're fleeing the growth, the traffic, and the rising cost of living. I promise you, if you do what most of us recommend, go join a Facebook group to learn about the area. You're gonna get a lot of good information in there from locals. But you're also gonna get the taste of this if you haven't already. Do yourself a favor and leave a comment saying that, hey, I'm relocating the area from New York, California, Jersey, and someone will be telling you to leave and not come here. I understand the challenge, trust me. I grew up in a small town in California that was awesome back in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up. But it's not the same anymore, hence the reason we left. Some of you have told me you're moving too because things changed over the years from where you were from. And a lot of people local here are afraid that's happening right now. People don't like change when things are good. I mean, you know how much a struggle it is to pack your bags and move out of state. You may have been talking about this for years before you finally made that decision that finally pushed you over the edge to say now's the time. Again, a lot of people don't like change, and locally people are seeing change. It takes longer to get anywhere around town. Chain stores are being replaced by the old mom and pop shops, and the affordable houses are no longer affordable. But I've said it time and time again, I hate to tell, and the growth isn't done yet. South Carolina has been ranked as one of the top 3 relocation states for the past few years and continues to stay on top of the chart, with Lexington considered the fastest growing area in the Midlands. And it's not only Lexington. You travel around the area and you see it in Northeast Columbia, Irmo, Chapin, now even pushing out to Elgin, Lugoff, Camden, Blythewood, Gilbert, Hopkins, and builders now even showing up in areas like Pillion, Batesburg, Lugoff, and so many more. It just doesn't seem to stop. And so can they keep up with the growth? For some people, they just can't stand it and they don't see it happening. And that's why they just say, I'm done with it. I can't stand the state. And I've had people drive down and visit the area and they tell me the exact same thing, Brandon. This is chaos. And of course, I told people it depends on what time of day. There's certain areas, school traffic, like I talked about, because of the way they're positioned, is just a nightmare. And you have to find alternate ways to get around because that school drop-off line is so long, blocking the roads and what seems like forever. Or of course, the leaving work traffic, or even we tend to be this crossroad of vacationers, it feels like, where on Friday afternoon at 3:30, if you're on 20 and 26 right in that corridor, you'll see all these out-of-state license plates as people are relocating, trying to get wherever they're getting. And so can the infrastructure keep up? I don't have that answer. It's hard to see it. And like I said, there's some areas of town, I find it hard to believe that it's gonna be that way. And so that's again where we come into play to kind of help you understand, like, how close are you really to the things that you need to be around? Is it gonna be an easy commute or is it gonna be that struggle? I tell people all the time, like, hey, if you live here, my recommendation is take this road or leave a little bit early because of that school traffic. That's where our expertise comes in so we can share with that. And again, the bonus one I wanna share that may not pertain to everybody, but some of you this does. And a lot of you, we've talked about this a lot, and that's missing family. This is a tough one. I moved out here, we moved out, my wife and I, without knowing anybody out here really. Everyone we know and associate with now are people we met here. Family is still all over the West Coast. plane flight away. It's not like you can hop on a car and get there, right? And that's a challenge. That's a challenge, especially as you get older and we have kids. And I'm blessed to still have both my parents around. And it's a challenge to sit there and think that my parents aren't getting that grandparent time with my kids and my kids aren't getting the same with them. Now, one of the big things that we did is knowing that we were going to save money moving here, we made a promise to ourselves that every year we would go back and visit our family. And we've done that. Even in the beginning when I was working as an EMT, we don't make a lot of money as EMTs, to be 100% honest. And we would put it on credit cards and put ourselves in debt just to fly back and visit our family because it wasn't something that we wanted to lose and miss out on because we moved out of the area. And thankfully, you know, as much it was a struggle to me, my dad told me if he was my age, he would have left too. He would have done the same thing, that my family now is my kids, my wife, my kids. That's what I gotta focus on, and that's where I need to focus. So thankfully, having that amazing, very wise parents give me that great peace of mind, so I didn't feel that much of a sense of guilt with my parents being on the other side of the country. And again, it can easily go back and visit. You know, for some of you, this is easier, right? It's only a drive back. But I know for those that it's not, that you got to get on a plane to go do those things. It's hard. You know, this year we had to go back for a funeral, and all of a sudden you're trying to book flights last minute to go to a funeral for the family. And it's just a challenge that, again, for some of you, you may realize this and how challenging it is. And it is difficult. But again, one of the benefits we found, as I talked about, is we were looking for that sense of community around us. And we found it. And I can't promise you this is going to be the case in every neighborhood. But we had friends that we've made in the neighborhood that they had family out of town as well. So we'd go spend Christmas with them. We'd spend the Easter holidays with them. Their kids became so close with my kids that it's almost like, you know, siblings, it feels like, cousins, you know, that are just not related, right? And so that's what we found within our neighborhood that kind of fulfilled that gap that we were missing. As much as I would love my parents and my family to move out there and maybe out here, maybe one day they will, I understand that struggle. And it's a challenge that I know some people can't stand. I've had some that say, you know what, I just have to be back by family. You know, I was hoping my parents, my kids, they would all follow us along, and they just haven't. And so I understand that challenge greatly. And it was the only thing that made me ever question, like, hey, do we want to move away from here? We again have been here since 2015. Not sure when you're watching this video, but we don't have plans on leaving. Yes, there's some things that I wish were different and wish were better, but we understood that when we were leaving California, we were looking for a culture shock, right? Like I talked about, things change. So I wouldn't expect the same things because otherwise it would be where I was. And so when we were looking for that change, we understood there were going to be some challenges that we were going to be faced with. And of course, as you have kids, you start to look at more of those things I've talked about before. I rode my bike to school growing up, walked everywhere. You don't have that stuff. And now with kids, it's kind of like, wow, I didn't realize that. But it hasn't been to the point where we're packing up and leaving, because overall, the big root of it, the values that we want, we're seeing. And so hopefully they can overcome some of these things, and that's why we're still here. And I always say this because a lot of people are like, if you don't like it, leave. I'm not saying that. I just don't want some of y'all to pack your bags, move your family across country, and realize it's not what you thought it was. Because I hear it from people from time to time, unfortunately, that have made that decision off a whim because they see videos online that make things look great, and it's not what you think it is. And that's why I share the good, the bad, and the ugly. Not to try and deter you and say this isn't the place, but to make sure that you're having that right, best decision. When we moved here, there wasn't a lot of this type of stuff. We learned it the hard way. Again, we adapted very well to it, but I know some people don't. Now, one of the other big issues I find is oftentimes people just move to the wrong spot, right? They scout areas online and they perceive it to be one way and they end up regretting it. You know, whether they bought sight unseen or whatever it was. And I've had some call me that after they moved here, they hadn't seen my videos, didn't contact me, and now they're calling me saying, Brandon, I need you to help me move. And so that's why I created this playlist that breaks down the area. So that way you can know which area best to consider that may match more with your needs. And then of course, like I said, reach out, because we may be able to help guide you better with that too. Where are the areas that you can walk to some type of downtown? Where are the areas that you have all those conveniences? So don't hesitate to reach out.